I'm Dr. Angela Gonzalez, Dr. Angie, and today we're going to be talking about autism and social integration and why is it such a struggle. And this is our very first webinar. So I first want to say I want to thank you, each and every one of you who are watching this live, or if you're watching this later recorded. I'm in such gratitude for you taking the time to be here, and I want you to know that I'm going to honor this time and the energy that you put out to join us here today. And so we have an hour today, which is not a lot of time. When I talk about autism and social integration, I usually am talking minimally in a 4-hour type of seminar, or a 2-day workshop, or a 5-day workshop where we are digging very, very deep into the reasoning and logic behind autism and why these individuals struggle with social integration. And in the workshops, we're talking about how do we then take that step further with that new knowing and understanding to help our loved ones, our students, people we're supporting, to participate fully in life, and giving you all those tools. But I've got an hour. So what I'm hoping to give you in an hour is some hope. When I go on tour, and I've been touring North America and talking on this subject and usually doing hour talks, what I hear most commonly after the talk is that now they have hope and they have some guidance on how they can proceed from there. So that is what I'm hoping to give you in this hour. So thank you again for being here. And before we proceed into the formal part of the presentation, I'd like to give you some context as to who I am and why you should even listen to me, and why I am considered to be an expert in the field that we're going to be talking about today. So again, I'm Dr. Angie, Dr. Angela Gonzalez. I am a pediatrician licensed in California. I'm a retired pediatrician now because I actually do this full time. I am a licensed Davis facilitator and also a licensed Davis autism facilitator and coach. And I'm also very blessed to be a Davis autism workshop presenter. And despite those two parts of who I am, being a pediatrician and being licensed to provide many different types of programs and workshops in Davis, I'm first and foremost a mom. And I get a little emotional during this part because this is what's near and dear to me, but I have 3 amazing, gifted, talented, brilliant young men, ages now 18 almost, age is 23. And all of them have characteristics, but primarily 2 of them, that would easily categorize them within society today as either dyslexic, dyspraxic, dysgraphic, synesthetic, um, sensory integration disorder, and very, very high functioning autism. So when I come to speak to you on this topic today of autism and social integration, know that it comes from a place um, from my heart as well as my knowledge base. My story, just very quickly, um, I was brought into Davis because of my youngest boy. Despite being a pediatrician, and my husband's always also a pediatrician, what was really challenging for us was in the younger years, my youngest one with the dyslexia. He had some very, very severe dyslexia and was reading at multiple levels below his grade level. And it was finding Davis and having him go through a Davis dyslexia correction that actually changed his life, but also just changed our lives as a family. And that is what brought me into this field, and went to go get my Davis licensing because I knew there were lots of pediatricians out there, but there weren't enough people doing this. There are not enough people that know and understand the Davis programs available to help these individuals who are gifted, talented, smart, intelligent individuals who are having to attempt to overcome these obstacles that are put in their lives because of their style of thinking. And we at Davis give them tools and guidance to do that. So with that said, let's go ahead and move into more of this information. Now, in a minute here, I'm going to be leaving as far as seeing me live, but we will be going into um, the presentation. So, autism and social integration. Why is this such a struggle? It's a struggle because as human beings having a human being experience, we live in communities. We are not living just somewhere out there all alone, all by ourselves. And so these individuals tend to struggle with this idea of socially integrating. So what we're going to be talking about today is why does that come along with this with the characteristics that we see in autism, and then how can we help them so that they can continue to participate fully in life. Now, I am an expert in the Davis Autism approach, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Davis Autism International, our mission is to help people on the spectrum to participate fully in life. That's what we're here to do. And so when we look through and go through this presentation today, we're going to be talking about autism and explaining it from the perspective of Ron Davis, who is a brilliant autistic genius. And we're going to talk about how he addressed the challenges of his autism by modeling life concepts that he didn't understand using clay. Now here's Ron. I really want to give you a moment to give you a little background on Ron. Now, when we do our 2-day workshops and our 5-day workshops and even the 4-hour seminar, we go a little bit more in depth, but I want to give you a couple of minutes and talk about Ron here a little bit. Ron, we're very blessed he is still alive. Ron was born prior to the term autism. So he was described as a Canner's baby. And he was described as a Canner's baby because back then, in the 1930s and 40s, there were a couple of people doing research on what was later to be termed autism. This was Dr. Canner and Dr. Asperger's. And Dr. Canner was working with individuals who had difficult times with social integration and were nonverbal and had other behaviors that set them apart from other individuals in society. And Dr. Asperger was working with more high-functioning verbal individuals that were still struggling with some of these life concepts that lead us toward social integration. So Ron did not speak until well into his teens. He has very little memory before the age of 9 because he says before the age of 9, he was lost within the void of autism. Now, as Ron was growing up and was in the school system, he was nonverbal. He was told that he was uneducable and mentally retarded. That's what his mother was told regarding him. And when he would go to school, his mother, being his champion, demanded that he be in a school setting. But in that school setting, he would actually sit in the back of the room. They'd have him on a chair in the back of the room, turn toward the corner of the room with a handkerchief on his head, because then if he was to move and the handkerchief fell off, he would be in trouble. And during this time, when Ron was growing up, he had this ability to take things apart. He was not quite sure why, but he would take things apart, but he couldn't get them back together. Now, his mother was his saving grace, but his father was a little less understanding regarding his situation. And based on his intolerance and his ignorance at that time, Ron had over 20 broken bones documented from repeated beatings by his father because of his behavior. And during that time, Ron also had a couple of brothers, and they were able to have things that he was not allowed to have. Things like a pocket watch and a switchblade. And so what he found, though, which was his saving grace, was in his backyard. You see that little picture there? In his backyard, there was red dirt and water. And when you would mix those two, it would make a clay. And out of that clay, he could make things that he wasn't allowed to have as as a young boy. So he would make a watch with red dirt and water and string, and he would wear that watch until it crumbled. He would make a switchblade and carry that around in his pocket until it crumbled. And what happened with this red dirt and clay is that I don't think Ron knows exactly why this began to happen, but he began to make other things in the clay, like people. And he would make his father, and he would smash his father. He would make his siblings and smash his siblings. He would even make himself and smash himself. Around the age of 12 or so, if I remember correctly, what Ron started to do, and again, not knowing quite why he began to do that, he began to clay not just people, but began to clay scenarios. And he began to clay the scenarios of the beatings. And soon after claying the scenarios of the beatings stopped. Because somewhere, coming out of that void of autism, as he was creating, coming out of the chaos that he described, he was beginning to organize his life. And he was beginning to do that by using the clay. So he began to see in some part of himself, in some part of his developing identity, where he could stop being part of the cause that was leading to the effect of the beatings. And in retrospect, Ron can look back and say this is where he began to build the life concept of consequence, something that happens as a result of something else. And as he began to build these scenarios, what began to happen is he began to bring organization and order into his life. So fast forward to around the age of 17, and again, we're not quite sure why, but Ron was tested again. And during this time, it was found that he was actually had an IQ of over 130. And they said, well, we've got to do something. And we've got to begin to educate this young man. And they began to give him, try to teach him to read, which wasn't very successful, but also began to put him in speech therapy, which was phenomenally successful for him, and brought this idea of words into his life. And so Ron continued to clay, and as he began to continue to clay these concepts, he began to participate more and more fully in life. So as we go through this understanding of what Ron has brought into the world, it comes from a place of knowing, a place of himself being autistic and bringing himself to a place where he was participating fully in life. And he talks about when he was younger, he could see people outside of him doing this thing, this human being experience, but he didn't feel as if that was him. And it was through these concepts where he found that humanness and his ability to participate fully in life. And again, just for your own information, around the age of 26 or so, Ron was tested again and was found to have an IQ of about 169. So we are talking about a genius. And what's beautiful about genius is actually not the ability to complicate things, but the ability to bring things down into their simplest form. There's a lot more information I'd love to share with you regarding Ron, but we'll save that for one of the other seminars. So Ron describes when he's in the void of autism, the feeling of being everything and nothing at the same time. So as we proceed here now, we're going to go into giving you some reasoning and logic, some fundamental or some foundational understanding of what we feel is going on with autism. And we're going to look at this as what we call the Davis childhood developmental phases. Now, I think all of you would agree that when we're looking at autism and autism spectrum disorders and even sensory integration disorders and even severe ADD and ADHD and pervasive developmental disorders, we're looking at something has gone awry within the neurotypical childhood development. I think most of us would agree. So if that's what's happening, then wouldn't it behoove us to understand neurotypical childhood development? And that's what we're going to look at. And from a Davis standpoint, we look at 3 phases of childhood development: individuation, identity development, and social integration. Now, when we look at individuation, this is this process that happens between the ages of 0 and 2. When all of us are birthed into this world, and despite all of our technology, we still only come into this world as human beings one of two ways: either the normal route, or we have to have surgery and we are brought out, right, via cesarean section. But those are the two ways that we get here. And once we get here, this little tiny human being, our job for those next 2 years is to find out where we, with our senses and our motor abilities, where we fit in this world, how we are separate from everything and everyone around us. So with that knowing, we can then continue on into identity development. Now, when we are born with this collection of white and gray matter called our brain. And it is made up of all of these different neural networks and pathways. And our job is to begin the process of helping them to communicate. And until that process occurs, we come here with things called instincts, right? Instinctual behaviors. Like if someone touches our cheek as a newborn infant, we turn toward that in hopes that it's food. If someone's holding us and our head drops a little bit, our arms automatically come out to grab as if we are falling out of something to keep ourselves from falling. So we have these instinctual reflexes as newborn infants. And as we begin to find where we are in this world through our senses and through our body moving, those instincts that we come here with begin to fade away, and our normal sensations and motor abilities take over. And so that's what we're doing in those first 2 years of life. And after that, after we realize that we are something separate from everyone and everything around us, it's at that point where we begin to build our identity of who we are, what we like, what we don't like, who we're here to be. And as we begin to build that part of who we are, once we have a sufficient identity built within ourselves, now we can progress into social integration. So when we're looking in Davis, we're looking at taking individuals through these 3 stages or phases of development. And as I go forward here, I want you to think about whoever you tuned in to in regards to, whether it's your child, whether it is students, whether it is yourself. Think about if neurotypical development occurs in this sequence, where could that individual be stuck? And see how that pertains to who you're here to support. So what I'd like to do is look at Piaget's stages of childhood development. And the reason we look at this is because we wanted you to see that what we're doing in Davis, we're not just pulling this, out of the air. This is based on years and years of research by others outside of Davis. And Jean Piaget was the first to really coin these stages of neurotypical childhood development. So let's look at what these look like. The first stage is the sensory motor stage. And this is usually birth to 2 years old. And the characteristics are that the infant begins to know the world through their movements and their sensations. So this sounds a lot like individuation, right? So as we come into the world, I love this little picture of this little kid here, because as adults, we wouldn't grab the cat and put it in our mouth, but as a baby, we're looking at our taste sense, our smell sense, our hearing sense, our feeling sense, and our visual sense to assess and bring in information from everything around us to begin to see, bring our perceptions into alignment. So whether we are perceiving from some stable place of what we call orientation or perception. The infant during this time, 0 to 2 years old, learns that things continue to exist even though they cannot be seen. So that's when peekaboo is not quite as fun, because up until this point, you do peekaboo, it's like every time you release your hands from your eyes, like, oh my goodness, that person is still there, right? Or you take a blanket and you put it over something, and then they're like, where did it go? And you remove the blanket, and there it is. And then they get to this point where you put a blanket over something, over their little toy, and they remove the blanket because they know that thing continued to exist even though they couldn't see it. They're beginning to understand that they are separate beings from the people and the objects around them. And they realize that their actions can cause things to happen in the real world. So this is the early stages of cause and effect. You know, you have a little baby, he's like 9 months old, and he's sitting there in his little high chair, and he's got his little spoon, the rubber tip spoon, and it drops on the floor. And what do you do as the parent or the caregiver? You reach down, you pick up the spoon, you give it back. And then what's the first thing they do? Right? They take the spoon, they throw it on the floor again. And now this becomes this game because now they're seeing how they are the cause of this effect that is occurring, which is you bending over to pick it up. They also begin to learn through assimilation and accommodation. And we go into that more in the bigger, deeper workshops, so we're not going to cover that here. Piaget's second stage is the pre-operational stage. So what I want you to see is if I go back to here and we look at the sensory motor stage, birth to 2 years old, this is looking like individuation, which is the first phase in a Davis program, helping a person to individuate. The second stage is the pre-operational stage. And this is occurring between 2 and 7 years old. And this is when kiddos begin to think more symbolically and learn to use words and pictures to represent objects. So it's during this time where they understand that the word milk means this white substance that they enjoy. They're beginning to put these symbols, which are words, to pictures and the ability to represent objects. During this time, they're very, very, very egocentric, and they really only have the ability to see things from their own point of view. Right? So if we look at this stage, look at this pre-operational stage, having transition. So first stage being individuation, where they realize they are something separate from all the people and objects around them. And now they realize I'm separate. This is what we call the what? The terrible twos, right? The terrible twos, because this little new being that understands that they are separate from everything and everyone around them is saying, hey, listen, mommy, daddy person, I am not you. I am me. I am Angie, and I want French fries. I don't want Brussels sprouts, and I am going to kick and scream to let you know what my wants and don't wants are, what my likes and dislikes are as I'm building that. They have a very difficult time seeing anything from someone else's perspective. Many of our individuals, our loved ones on the spectrum, are stuck here. Some of them are stuck if they're completely nonverbal. Even back in that first stage, they haven't even individuated out from everything and everyone around them. Some of them have begun the process of individuation, but have gotten stuck in this egocentric stage where everything can only be seen from their own perspective. Language and thinking is advancing, but they're still very concrete in their thinking. Piaget describes this next stage, the concrete operational stage, occurring between 7 and 11 years old. And during this stage, they begin to think logically about concrete events. They begin to understand this idea of conservation, that the amount of liquid in a short, wide cup is equal to that in a tall, skinny glass. And this is important to understand, because this understanding of conservation, if I have taken something, and without making it less or making it more, I have just transferred it to a new container, I can rationalize, I can deduce that it's the same amount of liquid. Prior to this ability, my cognitive abilities tell me that if it fills up what looks like more space in a different size glass, then there is more there. So when I begin to understand this, I can begin to bring this information out to the three-dimensional world and understand how things can change and how things can stay the same. My thinking becomes more logical and organized, but still extremely concrete. But I can begin to use inductive logic or reasoning from specific information to general principles. And very importantly, I begin to understand this idea of reversibility. Reversibility is important. Reversibility is the idea that if there is a cup, let's say, on the table, and there's no water in it, but there's the remnants of water in it, I can think backwards and think, well, before this moment, there was water in this cup. Now, I don't know if someone drank it or poured it out or what happened, but something happened before this. when I can begin to think with reversibility, what happened leading up to here, now that is the premise of the foundation of beginning to think forward, being able to think forward into, oh, this is what could happen next. And to enter into social integration, we have to have the ability to predict what could happen. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So what is really important for you to understand about this when we're talking about neurotypical childhood development, in whether it's Piaget from sensory motor up through, and we didn't even talk about Piaget's last stage, which is the formal operational stage, but looking at the phases of individuation, identity development, and social integration as they can be seen in the Piaget stages. What's important to understand is that even though Piaget gave these stages ranges of age, chronological age is not what's important. What is important here is the sequence of events, that they must occur in the given sequence. Therefore, looking at Piaget's stages, you cannot go into pre-operational stage, which is stage 2, if you haven't done stage 1, which is sensory motor stage. So it is based on the sequence, not the age of the individual. And the same thing for individuation, identity development, and social integration. So what's beautiful about this is that if we have an individual, and what we feel is going on with autism spectrum disorder is that the individual has become stuck somewhere in this progression or sequence of neurotypical development. If you think about this idea of dominoes, when you set dominoes up and you press down that very first domino, just if they're all in the proper order and sequence, just hitting the first domino continues that process all the way to the very last domino. But if you've removed a couple of dominoes, or a few of them are out of step, not quite in alignment, then what's going to happen? It's going to stop. And that is what we feel is happening in autism spectrum disorder. So they are stuck. So what's beautiful about that, it doesn't matter if they're stuck at somewhere in their identity development and they're 45 years old. What we can do is we can help unstick them. And we can do that because we know the sequence in which the developmental stages need to come down. And we know that because Ron had brought him through this whole process in the perfect sequence so he could participate fully in life. So if we're looking at this, again, individuation is the first step. So the first thing we need to help individuals do is to ensure that individuation has occurred, that they have become an individual. So how are we going to do this? So at this point, what I would really encourage you to do, I'm going to go into some information you've probably never heard before. And I would like you to take whatever your pre-existing ideas are in regards to autism and just set them aside just for a moment. You can bring them back into your identity. They're part of who you are anyway. But I'd like you to open a little bit of a space and just be open to this foundational information that I'm going to share with you that rings so true for me. And at the end of this, you can take this information and chuck it if you choose, or will you integrate it into your own identity and it becomes part of who you are so you can move forward with more knowledge and more understanding with these beautiful individuals that you may be working with. So to become an individual, to individuate, what we are doing is we're integrating the parts of us that make us human beings. And one of the parts that makes us human being is our physical world. Now, our physical world is where we are connected to cause, effect, and time. Now, the physical world, we are only having this interaction. We're socially integrating right now, even though we're doing it through technology, we're doing this right now. So we are connecting right now in the physical world. Even if you are listening to this and you're just listening to the audio, still it's your physical body that is picking up this information. So cause and effect and time are only aspects of the physical world. But the physical world is where we have impact on others and others have impact on us. We also all come here with our own thought worlds. So currently, I have no idea what's going on in any of your thought worlds. You may not even know what's going on in mine, right? But in our thought world, that is private for self, but it's still a huge part of who we are. Think of how many of you out there spend a lot of time in this part of who you are. When I work with individuals with ADD and ADHD, this is where they spend a huge part of their time, is in their thought world. But there's another part of who we are as human beings, and that's our instinctive world. And this is the place where our emotions are connected with the sense, from which our emotions connected with the sense of self develop. Our instinctive world is that place where we are always having an urge to go toward pleasure and away from pain. This is our fight or flight place. We all come here with all three aspects, all three of these worlds as part of us. That first year, the first couple of years, 0 to 2, we are looking to integrate these worlds and bring them all into alignment. The instinctive world, that is that place that, if you are out at the baseball field and you're in the stands and a baseball comes flying at you, if you see it coming, there's two things you're instinctively going to do. Your hands are going to come up to try and block it. And there's also a good chance your eyes are going to start to shut to protect your eyes. You can't stop that from happening. That is an instinctual response. But because you are in harmony, most likely, with your instinctive world, your thought world, and your physical world, if something's coming at your eyes, and if someone were to say, let's say when you have to put eye drops in. And when you first start this process of trying to put eye drops in, you instinctively want to close your eyes. But then you can go into your thought world and say, Angie, I've got to get my contacts in. So I need to be able to put these drops in my eyes. And then you can transmit that information to your physical world. You can actually hold your eyes open. So all those are working together. So can you imagine if you did not have the ability to do that? If these three worlds were not working in harmony together, and you were constantly responding to your instinctive world, to the instinctive responses you have in any situation, and your physical body was just going behind that instinctive response, like your eyes are continuing to shut because you can't stop that from happening. So if you think about, I'm sure those of you out there who have individuals who are on the autism spectrum, you have experienced meltdowns and you have experienced tantrums. Where do you think meltdowns, which part of their being, instinctive, thought, or physical world, do you feel as if meltdowns generate from? Right? They generate from the instinctive world. So what we're going to do is we're going to help individuals for individuation. We're going to help them to integrate those worlds and bring them all together so they are working in alignment. Individuation is when all three of those worlds are working in harmony, when we have established a stable sense of orientation, a stable place from which we are perceiving the world. If individuation does not fully occur, then the usual developmental stages do not progress. Because remember, it is not about the age, it is about the sequence. And if that first part, individuation, does not occur, identity development cannot begin. Most of these individuals on the autism spectrum are stuck in the instinctive world, and also their thought world. They spend a lot of time there as well, but in this instinctive world where they are just in survival mode, everything is toward pleasure and away from pain. So what we want to do is we want to help bring them into the physical world, help connect them to these ideas of what's going on in the physical world. What is cause? What is effect? What is time? And this is where we need to help them grow. So if they haven't done this, if they haven't brought these all into harmony together, then how in the world are we going to help them integrate those three worlds? And so we know that individuation requires us to use our senses and our motor development to come into harmony. And so what Ron thought in his brilliance, being an engineer, he created a way to come to help individuals create a stable place from which they're seeing the world by coming through the auditory sense. And we affectionately within Davis call this the ting. And kiddos and adults can listen to this sound via headphones, stereo headphones. It is a three-dimensional sound that Ron engineered that, when listened to through stereo headphones, comes from a place a few inches above and behind the head. And it reverberates back and forth off the midline about 1/8 of an inch on either side. And what that does is it pulls their attention there. So this is another way, because when Ron was developing this, he knew that as a child, there was no way he could have wore headphones. So he wanted to have something that other kiddos could use to achieve orientation. And he developed this device that can be worn on the back that is called the Noit. And what this does, all of these, whether it's the stereo headphones or whether it's the Noit device, it allows them to hear this sound every 8 seconds. Now I'm going to see if I can play this sound for you and see if you're going to be able to hear this. I don't think so. Yeah, let's see. Here we go. It might be loud. I hope not. Let's see. No, weren't able to hear it. But when we hear this sound, it's a ting sound. And again, it's meant to be heard, and it goes every 8 seconds. And what it does, because it's coming from a point above and behind your head, whether you're wearing the Noit or whether you're listening to it on stereo headphones, every 8 seconds, your attention is pulled to that place. So imagine you're there and you're playing and you have on your headphones, every 8 seconds, your attention, your auditory sense is pulled to this stable place of orientation. And what we know, if we get one sense to go to this stable place of orientation, the other senses will come behind that in short order. And so these individuals, we help them to individuate by using the ting. So when we individuate, this is when we as human beings become aware of a self. We become aware that we are something separate from all others, and we're functioning separately from others. At this point, they've brought their senses and perceptions into alignment and are aware of the environment around them. So once they've done that, we're going to help complete this stage of individuation. We've helped them become oriented, have a stable place of orientation. So now they are sensing and perceiving everything from this stable place of orientation. We brought all three of their worlds into alignment. Now we're going to help solidify that and complete individuation by taking them using clay. Ron used clay. These individuals are extremely creative, and to master anything, they need to be able to help create it. Now, depending on the age and the ability of the person that you're working with, they may not be able to make clay to the degree that you see here on the slide. But what we want to do is help them at least partially create. So we may make the whole body, we may even roll up the head, but maybe they can put the eyes on there. Maybe we have to put the eyes and mouth, but they can at least put the head on there. And then we're going to take them through this first understanding, this first concept of self. And we're going to break down these three different worlds and give them understanding of their physical world, their body, their thought world, their mind or their thought process, and their instinctive world, or what we call life force, which is that urge to be who and what we are. And with that, individuation is complete. Now, individuation is complete at this point, whether they are 8, 16, 24, 40, 52, or 60, doesn't matter. Now they've individuated. And because they are wired as human beings, once they've individuated, identity development will begin. So what we can do, though, with what we know in Davis, as opposed to having them individuate and leave them in the chaos and have them just have random life experiences to begin to create this identity and this understanding of life concepts, we can actually facilitate them through a quicker organization or creating order within their lives by giving them more information on how these life concepts occur. And so we would have helped someone individuate, and now we're going to help them with identity development. We're not going to build their identity, of course, that's going to happen within self, but we're going to give them some structured teaching and facilitate them through some life experience to understand that. Identity development is when identity development refers to the learning that normally takes place as children grow and learn concepts that help them to understand how the world works and how they work. You know, as kiddos, if we are oriented, if we have a stable place of orientation and we're perceiving the world correctly, and we burn ourselves by touching something hot on the stove, what we learn in that moment is cause and effect. We learn, I'm not going to touch hot things on the stove. This is how we go through life, learning these life concepts through experiences. This is how we become who we are. We taste chocolate and go, man, I love that. Or like, that's not so great, right? And we're building our likes and our dislikes. Identity development is when we become a someone, creating identity. And this can only happen through real experiences. You can't think through it, and you can't tell someone enough about it for it to become part of who they are. So we need to help these individuals who we've just helped them individuate. We need to help them learn these life concepts. And we can do that in some specific orders. So to teach them these life concepts, we're going to do some explicit teaching, which means we're going to have some discussion. Regardless of their level, their verbal abilities, we're going to have this discussion, but we're also going to bring it down in clay. And then once they have clayed this understanding and they have a little bit of understanding, we're going to facilitate further understanding of these life concepts through facilitating them through life experiences. And it's not hard because we're talking about life concepts. These things are happening all around us. So what do these life concepts look like? They're concepts such as change, something becoming something else. There in that picture, there's blocks. We use clay because clay is beautiful, and the kind of clay we use, it can actually be destroyed easily. So if they don't like the way it looks, even 5 days later, it can be destroyed. It never dries. So in here, change is something becoming something else. These blocks becoming a tower of blocks, and self is just watching. We're going to look through, if we're working in a 2-day workshop and working with young kiddos, we're looking at only needing to make it through about 8 concepts. If we're working with older individuals, like 16-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 50-year-olds, there's a lot of life concepts missing that we need to help them get caught up on to bring order into their lives and help them to socially integrate. And there's going to be about 30 of those. And some of them are like consequence, something that happens as a result of something else. Emotions, self-created energy, perception, external awareness. So being aware of things exist outside of us and being left with the thought or the memory of that object. And time, what is time? The measurement of change in relation to a standard. And we're going to take them through these concepts. So now let me tell you a little bit about, now you have a little more foundational understanding. Again, in our workshops, we go a lot deeper. We have stepping stones. Now, stepping stones can be done one-on-one with a Davis autism facilitator, or it can be done in a workshop setting by someone who is licensed to provide Davis autism workshops. So who is stepping stones for? It's for parents, teachers, and support persons of kiddos that are 3 to 8 years old with autism spectrum disorder, or they're 3 to 8 years old, don't have autism spectrum disorder, but are struggling with concepts like cause and effect. Lots of our little kiddos with ADD and ADHD struggle with the ideas of cause and effect. They spend so much time in the thought world, they're not really having experiences in the real world the way they're really happening. They're having experiences the way they think they're happening. And so their idea of cause and effect is can be a little wonky. If you have an individual who's on the autism spectrum who's older than 8 but is nonverbal, stepping stones is also the one for you. And also, stepping stones is great for anyone looking to deepen their understanding of these amazing, amazing, exceptional human beings. So what are we going to cover in a stepping stones program or in a stepping stones workshop? We're going to cover these life concepts of, first we're going to help them individuate and what that looks like, and give you that information, and you're going to be able to go back and help your loved one individuate if they haven't. If they've already individuated, that step goes very quickly. Then we're going to look at the concepts of me, body, mind, life force, another, and others, so we can set up this understanding that there are other people outside of self. And then we're going to go through these life concepts of change, consequence, cause and effect, and before and after. We also have a 5-day workshop, which is the Davis Life Concepts for Autism, or you can work one-on-one again with a licensed Davis autism facilitator and coach. When you're working one-on-one with a Davis facilitator or coach, the program takes as long as it takes. When we're looking at the workshops, like the 2-day workshops for Stepping Stones and the 5-day workshop for the Davis Life Concepts for Autism, we are not looking at those as being actual programs. What we're looking at is giving a support person, a loved one, all the knowledge and understanding they need, and tools and materials even, and experiences even within those workshops, to then be able to go home and work at their own pace with ongoing support from the workshop presenter or other Davis autism facilitators, for them to work one-on-one for as long as it takes with their individual. And that's going to range from person to person. So the Life Concepts for Autism 5-day workshop, who is that for? It's for parents, teachers, and support persons of kiddos that are 8 years old or older, right? Up to any age. There's no end on that, with autism spectrum disorder, and they are verbal. If they are 8 years old or older without autism spectrum disorder, but they're struggling to understand life concepts such as cause and effect, consequence, motivation, and responsibility. Again, kiddos with ADD, ADHD, adults with ADD, ADHD, high functioning autism. It's a great workshop to help those individuals. It's also for teens, young adults, and older adults who themselves are very high functioning individuals on the autism spectrum. And again, it's great for anyone who's looking to deepen their understanding of these exceptional things. When we are looking at the Life Concepts for Autism 5-day workshop, we're going to go through the concepts. First, again, help with individuation and with how that works. You're going to get some self-regulatory tools for yourself and be able to go home and give these tools to your loved one. Same thing with the stepping stones. You're going to yourself get self-regulatory tools. They're going to help you manage your frustration, your irritability, help you relax. All of these individuals that we're talking about are highly sensitive, empathic, intuitive human beings, and they pick up on how you are showing up. I'm sure you've noticed that if you show up and you're angry, you're going to have a much harder day with them than when you are in your place of calm, relaxed states. And so we're going to give you some personal self-regulatory tools to bring you into that place, and then also give you the ability to share those tools with your loved one. In this 5-day workshop, we're going to be going through the concepts, again, starting with individuation and self, all the way up through responsibility. We're going to go through 30 different concepts to get to responsibility. Now, if you look at this is, I mean, it's a lot of words up there and stuff, so don't get caught up or hung up in that. But if you look at each of those inverted pyramids, right? One starts with change, the next one starts with the continue, the next one with energy. If you look at those, we build up from there. So once we talk about the concept of change, then we go to the concept of consequence. And within consequence is cause and effect and before and after. Then we go up into the concepts of time, sequence, and order and disorder. If you look at this is the physical world. This is the physical world of cause and effect and time, and giving them the ability to create order within their physical world. That next one, inverted pyramid, beginning with continue, is as the first foundational concept, and then building on that with this idea of survive, because as human beings, that's how we continue, right? To continue as self. And then building on the idea of survive with these ideas of perception, thought, and experience. How do we survive as change with understanding, knowledge, and wisdom? And that is our thought world. And that last inverted pyramid, beginning with energy or urge, like that, remember that urge to be who and what we are, our urge to go toward pleasure and away from pain. and built in energy, and then moving up into the ideas of force and emotion and want and need and intention. And this is our instinctive world. Now, if you look at those three inverted pyramids, what are they all rooted in? What is all at the bottom there? Self. So individuation has to occur before these life concepts can begin to take hold. And once we have those three areas in, now we can go up to that next part up there, which is actually where you see motivation, ability, and control. Each one of those are more complicated life concepts for us to master and understand. And we need to have at least two of those inverted pyramids in place in our identity for those higher level concepts to be understood and become part of our identity. And once we understand motivation and ability and control, now we can understand this idea of responsibility. Because what is responsibility? Responsibility is having the motivation or the willingness and the ability to control something. So now what's powerful about looking at this model that we're going to help these individuals with is that if I have not individuated, how can I be held responsible for anything? These are concepts that build one on top of another. If I do not understand the idea of consequence, cause and effect, how I am at the cause of positive and negative effects I'm experiencing in my world, how can I be responsible? I can't. I can't. So many of us are asking these individuals to be motivated. If I don't have any wants, how can I be motivated? How can I be willing if I don't even have a want? Right? And I haven't been able to set an intention to move forward with something. I can't. So with this understanding for yourself as the parent, the caregiver, the educator, you begin to have increased tolerance and patience for these individuals because you have a deeper understanding of what they are struggling with and why it looks like, of course, you fell because you were running. And they may say, I didn't fall because I was running. I fell because I was being chased. And they will never put the direct cause and effect of they were running, that's why they fell, into place. And so you could discipline them over and over and over again. And until they have these life concepts as part of their identity, it will not take hold. There's nowhere for that information to take hold. So now, looking at the phases, individuation to identity development to social integration. If I have not individuated and began to create enough of a core identity where I've had experiences, can I proceed to social integration? I cannot. As much as we would love them to, they cannot. So if I am involved in a process that looks like I want my child to be socially integrated, I want them to understand this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get them to memorize these certain responses to certain things, then that's not true social integration. That's just memorizations of responses. For example, if I am trying to teach my child or my loved one or my student that when people say hi, you say hi, then they may learn that. So now if someone says hi, they say hi. But if someone comes in and goes, hey man, what's up? They don't know what to do with that because it's not part of their identity. They've memorized their response. There's no knowingness. There's no understanding of the reason why they do that. But if they've individuated and built enough of a core identity to have had multiple experiences, and those experiences, because they have a core identity, have taken hold as part of who they are, they can draw on those past experiences and understand by the person's tone and by their motions and by their waving and by their words that they're saying hello. And they can then, based on that, come up with an adequate response. So social integration cannot begin to occur unless I have developed enough of a core identity to have had enough experiences to understand how to act or behave in a certain situation. So social integration is when individuals are seeking interaction with others for enjoyment. Now, social integration is based on our past experiences. If I haven't individuated, I haven't began to build a core identity sufficient enough to store experiences. It's like trying to pour water into a colander and wondering why it won't fill up. There's too many holes in who they are being. And so once I've individuated and I begin to have experiences, and I am going through, I'm understanding cause and effect in relationships and creating order in my life. And these experiences I've had, I bite somebody and I can actually appreciate the effect. Oh, because I bit them, they're crying. I no longer want that to be part of my reality. And now I can begin to bring that into my identity. So when I come across somebody else, I can predict that if I bite them, they're not going to like it. But until I've individuated and begin to build enough of a core identity, I cannot have experiences that I can pull on and relate to. So social integration is about being able to, based on my past experiences, predict what's going to happen in a situation. Being able to walk into a situation and have a social imagination. I wonder what's going on here. Those two are at opposite ends of the room and not looking at each other. Maybe they had an argument. Social interaction. How close can I get into someone's space? Where does their energetic space stop and mine start? What's comfortable for that? And then social communication. What are the words I can use? What is the body language I can use to convey to them accurately? And so when we are working in the workshop, we will also take you through this information so that you can go back and work with your loved one and be able to take them through the concepts necessary for social integration. And we're going to go through the processes of what are good and bad behaviors and what are emotions that bring you closer to survival and more away from survival, and allow them to be able to make decisions based on what's good, what's bad, and what's wrong and right. And they begin to develop that for self. So these are just a couple of testimonials of Davis in action. This mom said, Tyler's language has exploded. He understands people now. Davis has been the foundation for such positive change. Little Matthew, I like to play with my brother and sister now. We don't fight so much anymore. Little Emily, I haven't been to the principal's office in over a year. This was a high-functioning Asperger adult female who said, the Davis approach has given me the confidence to just be in the world without getting overwhelmed by the mass of information surrounding me. Instead of wanting to shut it out and hide from the confusion, I am more curious and interested in learning. I think the Davis approach offers the gift of freedom to live as a human being. These are 5 individuals that I just pulled up because they both are indicative of different things that have occurred. Marie was one of the first individuals I worked with. She was actually 52 when I met her, and she remembered going into the void of autism. And she said she went into the void of autism about 4, and it was as if someone had closed her in a cage, and she could see out, and she could see all the people outside of her having a human being experience, but she couldn't get out there. And for her, she said the Davis program was like someone reached in and gave her the key, so she could open the door whenever she wanted to and go out and interact with the others out there. Marie also had not individuated, even though she was 52. And prior to coming into the program and listening to the team, she said that she thought she was everything. She was the blades of grass. She was her dog. She was the leash that she walked her dog with. She was everything. She couldn't separate out from everything around her or anyone else. A little boy named Davis I worked with was just a sweetheart. He had a lot of fears. He's very high functioning, Asperger kiddo, and he was able to, with individuation and with the understanding of cause and effect and bringing some order into his physical world, he was able to go swimming. And he couldn't go swimming before that because in his thought world, cause and effect was such that in the swimming pool there could be sharks. So once he was present, individuated, and understood cause and effect, and began to have experiences based on the real world physical things that were occurring, he realized there were no sharks in pools. And he was able to begin to swim with the rest of his family. Little boy named Isaiah took his parents through a one-on-one stepping stones course. And little Isaiah was 6 years old, not very verbal. And the first day that they put the ting on him at the age of 6 was the first day he went to the potty by himself. So why would that be? Because remember, when we individuate, we're coming into harmony with our physical, thought, and instinctual world. So this little boy came into his physical. He was grounding into his physical self with having a stable place of orientation with as quick as a day for him. So he was able to actually tune into the body sensation of having to go to the bathroom. Within 2 weeks, Isaiah was able to tell his parents when he was hungry. How many of you kiddos who have young kiddos who are on the spectrum have to feed on a schedule because they're not in tune enough with their bodies to even be able to say when they're hungry? Dwayne and Albert were interesting because they actually came to 5-day workshops. Dwayne, not diagnosed as Asperger's or high functioning autism, probably a little bit. I hope he's listening to this because I'm very, very proud of Dwayne. He came to the program or to the workshop at the age of 19 and didn't know what he was going to do with his life, wasn't driving because he didn't even know how he was going to go about being able to get his driver's license. And within a few months of having finished just the workshop and not even doing that much at home after the workshop, but going through all the concepts in the workshop, he actually was able to come up with a plan and he got his driver's license and was driving around and has decided that he wants to be a mechanic and is trying to put his world into place in order so he can do that. And Albert, again, I hope you're listening, Albert. I'm so proud of you. Albert came in, high functioning autistic individual, brilliant, genius level IQ. And he didn't use pronouns. He referred to himself as yours truly. Now, why? Because if we haven't individuated, we don't know that we're a self separate from everything and everyone around us. And because he didn't know that he was a separate self, he referred to himself as yours truly or as Albert. And after going through the workshop, I remember him calling me and asking me a few weeks later, says, you know, Dr. Gonzalez, Dr. Angie, do you think I've individuated? And we had a long conversation and he referred to himself as I the entire time, never as yours truly. And I told him that and I said, Albert, you've individuated. And because he was referring to himself just as I, and he was just tickled pink. He was so excited about that. So we get to see so much change happening.